Good morning. Welcome to Embedded Systems 2. In addition to trying to bring minds and bodies together, another big theme of CAST, and kind of the theme of this session, is pushing robots into the wild. So the idea is many of us are used to doing robotics in laboratories, but we actually want to get robots out of the lab and get them out into real-world environments where we face enormous challenges, but also enormous opportunities to actually use robots to save time and energy and get sort of science done. So as Maury and Aaron were mentioning earlier today, we've sort of decided to set a number of themes for CAST. One of them being explorers. Caltech is a premier science school, and JPL down the road, of course, is a premier agency for exploring the solar system. And so we'd like to embed, that's the idea of this session, robots out into the wild and actually embed autonomy into these robots so they can actually do interesting things and gather interesting scientific data, especially in places where humans don't want to go or it's difficult for them to go. We also want to study what are called guardians. These are robots which we can embed in the environment to sort of leap out at a moment's notice and sort of help us tackle things like disasters, fires, earthquakes, etc. And also, we want to embed intelligence into vehicles so we can enable the future of autonomous transportation, or at least help pilots when they're in very difficult situations and need sort of assistance to be able to do their job. So today's talk session is actually involving all three of these topics. So we have three science topics. We have sort of one guardian topic and sort of one transportation topic. So what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes are some projects I've been involved in that are related to CAST and related to these themes. And so the first one is motivated by the incredible activity that's happening up at JPL in using robots to explore Mars. So in addition to the rovers, for which we're on the 4th generation at JPL, all of you know about the Mars helicopter, which could, in this first version, carry 50-gram payload of kind of a camera. Currently, there's activities at Mars to look at actually much larger versions for future missions, which could carry up to sort of 4 kilos. But with Arash Kalantari, where Arash, I was here earlier, and what we've looked at actually is an alternative idea, which is instead of having only 4 kilos of science payload on the robot, what if you could actually drop a pallet full of different sensor modules, which are smart and intelligent, and then use the robot to actually go out and search for interesting sites where payloads could be placed, and then go back up, pick up these payloads, which you'll see in a moment actually are smart payloads that actually have grippers on them and actually attach them to surfaces, and then they would have actually computers and sensors instead of a network for doing science, and actually could be then relifted off of the placement and placed somewhere else. So Arash's group and our group came up with kind of 3 innovations to make this possible. The first one was actually a novel kind of helicopter, actually a drone. It's a hexacopter. The novel part of it is that it actually has a mass balancing boom, so that actually, because the payload that we're carrying is 1.5 kilos on a 3.5 kilo robot, this is a larger payload to weight ratio than ever has been demonstrated before. This arm extends out, and actually all the batteries and the computer are actually in the back of the arm, so it tends to balance the mass as we extend the arm out to make the payload. The second one, which I'm not going to talk about today, is we developed some innovative control theory. And then here's actually the sort of smart payload. What you'll see right here is these are microspine grippers. They're basically fixed hooks. There's a motor that when you press against the wall and clamp this down, it can clamp onto almost any possible sort of surface. There's then also receptacles to grab the payload, onboard batteries, computers, sensors, and wireless transmitters to set up a sensor network. And so these payloads can sort of anchor themselves, and actually, unlike any other sort of aerial manipulation seen before, they can actually collaborate with a robot to actually place themselves on rocks. Because of their design, they can actually be taken off and then repurposed later. So to deploy these things, We developed with Arash actually a control system during the deployment phase that the idea is you go up and approach the wall. You then sort of push against the wall because the microspine grippers actually need a little bit of bias force to help them grip. You then tug and make sure actually that the device actually is securely fastened. And then once you're sure that it's fastened, then you can actually detach it and go on and pick up another payload or do some other task. So let's see this in practice here in the CAST laboratory. So this is manual. Now we switch to autonomous. This little periscope you see in the top actually is a camera. So this is camera guided. You'll see in a moment. So now the operator has locked onto a target. On that wall there is actually tiles of basalt, which is very similar to rocks on Mars. And so here you can see it's servoing towards the target that's been selected by the operator. So now it's going to push. So here you can see the forces that the system is measuring. Once it's got commands back from the microspine gripper that I've closed, it'll now sort of tilt backwards and then actually try to do the sort of tug test, and then is satisfied that actually the grip is solid, and so then it can kind of release. Now, to do scientific operations like this, a lot of times we need to actually do other things that don't look like science, but actually support our ability to put these robots out in the field. And so here's another project which is motivated by the work I do with Arash, but actually is also relevant to our new project with TII, actually on autonomous transportation, particularly in complex environments like a drone race or inside an urban environment. So imagine we've got a drone or some other object flying around, and it actually has some job to do. So it's doing this job, and it has some onboard sensors. And then either other people come up and get in the way, or someone throws something at it, or is working in an environment where there's lots of other robots, like a race. And so what you'd like to be able to do is to be able to avoid these other objects. Now, traditionally in this field, the problem is we don't assume we know anything about these objects, but typically it's been assumed that you know something about them, so you can actually have some predictive rule, so you can figure out where they're going to go. But what we do is just assume that all we have is we can find a point on the robot that we can, on the object that we can track, and we just measure the series of 3D locations of that point and actually potentially have noise either from the sensors we have or from uncertainty in the environment that's pushing those objects around, or actually our uncertainty in terms of our knowledge of the robot, knowledge of the agent that's trying to harm us. So this is a little wonky, just listen to my words, not so much the slides. If we knew the dynamics of this system, then we could actually make predictions about where it's going to be. But we assume we know nothing, and so this will segue into the afternoon session. We actually learn in real time the dynamics of these objects. And the way we do this is, those of you familiar with control theory, is we sort of take the streaming data from our sensors and we construct what's called a Hankel matrix, which sort of gathers the data in a sequential form, and then intelligently, using some new theory out of Stanford, actually sort of threshold this data so we can actually separate out what is the signal and what is the noise. The noise is from the sensors, the noise is from wind, the noise is from our uncertainty in the learning process. So 50 times a second we do this. And then from the signal part, we actually construct what's in essence an autoregressive model that actually can kind of be used to predict where the vehicle will go. And the clever part of this work is we then actually use the noise, we don't throw it away, to actually create a bootstrap of all of the sort of realistic trajectories that this object, which is coming toward us, can actually follow given the data and the learning that we have so far. So then, dovetailing on Preston's talk earlier, we use a risk-aware technique from the financial services industry to figure out actually what's the tail risk in the distribution here, and then figure out what level of risk are we willing to tolerate, and then construct a path which will avoid the obstacle at a certain risk level and also try to keep as close to our task as possible. So here you'll see Billy, who's our timekeeper menacing me up front here, and Alejandro in the back, who's our last speaker. This robot is given a task to be patrolling this area, and now, at the moment, we don't yet have cameras hooked up on the robot, so those sticks actually have markers on them which actually they're picked up by a tracking system that gives the robot the information about where the obstacles are. So here you see them teasing the robot, and so it wants to get back to its job, but they're both sort of so close, so then it sort of figures out, aha, I can actually escape them this way. And so again, this is done by real-time learning 50 times a second about what these people are trying to do. And actually, it works on drones as well. And so this just is a few weeks old, and so we're hoping to further advance this by adding the real-time cameras and tracking for our upcoming project with TAI on autonomous drone racing and urban sort of flying. So let me sort of finish off with one sort of final thought. In addition to developing algorithms, sometimes we have to develop unique hardware to help the scientists in the field. So Victoria Orphan's group here, as well as Andy Thompson, our first speaker, send vehicles deep underwater, sometimes to gather samples. And so conventional ROVs, which go deep in the ocean to grab things, use these sort of hard metallic grippers. And so for soft biological material, they can really sort of shred them up. Now, this has been noticed before, so some people have actually proposed a very flexible pressure-driven grippers that can actually grab and adapt to soft material. The problem is because they're driven with pneumatics, they can only go about 10 meters deep. So we want something which can actually be very soft, very reliable, actually no actuator. Can we actually make a gripper which actually doesn't need a motor, but which can conform to every possible object and is very cheap and sort of throwaway, so we can design them sort of mission by mission. And so a couple years ago on my YouTube feed, this thing came up. It's been dubbed the fractal gripper. This was actually patented in 1912 and actually was lost to time and only resurfaced a couple years ago. So the idea is this vise has these complicated sort of moving jaws that can actually adapt to any shape, and the only actuator you need is just to close the hand. So with Malcolm Tisdale, the undergraduate here at Caltech, we've been exploring this space of these fractal grippers, which actually have really unusual properties. No one's noticed them before because they're not anthropomorphic. They actually don't look like any human hand, but they're actually quite amazing. So here in this design, what you'll see, it doesn't look like anything like the fractal gripper. The original design was incredibly heavy and hard to manufacture. So redesigned the principle using our mathematics so that we have a series of sort of approximately rotating joints, which also then have springs built into the joints. These are all 3D printed in a single pass. So these come right out of the printer. You can wash them off and you put them to work. They weigh about 40 grams for each finger. And what you can prove, and that's where the work I've been doing, is actually these can actually mathematically grip any sort of possible object under certain regular kinds of conditions. And again, the fingers actually have no actuator, so there's really nothing to go wrong other than you sort of break the fingers. All right. Now, you may say, here you notice at the end there, here's a 3D version of this that we're currently working on. And so, like I said, we're now moving on a whole variety of different three-dimensional grippers that look like this. And actually, we're in discussion with the Victoria Orphans group to actually start to take these underwater and use these to grab sort of biological material. So with that, I'll thank you, and actually we'll start our session with Andy Thompson up first, talking about deep underwater vehicle planning.
Okay, thanks very much, Joel, and thanks everyone for coming out. Thanks for the opportunity to present some of the work. I'm going to be talking about the CAST project we have called Stirring Up the Southern Ocean, Autonomous Piloting of Ocean Robots to Study Heat and Carbon Exchange. And this is work in collaboration with Luna Bai, who's a graduate student in the Environmental Science and Engineering program, Mar Flexus, who's a senior research associate in ESE, and then Andrew Branch, who's a long-term collaborator up at JPL. So why are we focusing on the Southern Ocean? Not just because you can take these amazing pictures of icebergs here, but the Southern Ocean is this really remarkable and unique place in the climate system. In terms of the ocean, it is the only location where there are no obstructions or no continental boundaries, which enables a very strong current to form around Antarctica that flows from west to east, known as the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. It's the only place where it forms. In the interior of the ocean, this has really important implications. As you look at these cutaways, those lines there are showing different density surfaces of the stratified ocean, and whereas over most of the ocean, those density surfaces are flat, in the Southern Ocean, they tilt up towards the surface. And if we think about where the distribution of carbon is in the ocean, most of the most carbon-rich waters reside in the deep ocean, where organic matter has sunk and been respired by bacteria. And so we think of the Southern Ocean as this critical place where deep carbon-rich waters upwell towards the surface, and we have large exchange with the atmosphere. That's what's shown on the right-hand side. And similarly, if we look at the total amount of anthropogenic carbon that has been released to the atmosphere, 50% of all of the anthropogenic carbon that has gone into the ocean has entered the ocean through the Southern Ocean. So this is a really important place, and you can actually see the injection here of anthropogenic carbon into the interior. Now, there are a number of reasons why the Southern Ocean is important for carbon uptake, and one of those is that it is a very energetic region. So here's a region of the Southern Ocean. There's longitude and latitude. You're looking at a snapshot of open ocean temperature. And what we've learned over the last decades, largely using remote sensing, is that it is made up of many coherent, turbulent structures that we refer to as the ocean's mesoscale eddies. These are features that are about 20 to 100 kilometers. And they're really important because they're involved with very energetic horizontal motions that stir up the upper ocean. And in particular, when they stir the upper ocean, they generate coherent features that are about an order of magnitude smaller. So on the scale of about 1 to 20 kilometers, that are associated with what we call the ocean submesoscale, or very, very small scale fronts. And when you generate these small scale fronts in the ocean, these are places where we have very strong enhanced vertical velocities. So if I show a picture of what this looks like, you have this large scale straining motion that's due to the ocean's mesoscale that drive these small scale fronts. Here's an example with warm water on one side, cold water on the other, but it could be any tracer. It could be dissolved CO2, it could be a nutrient. And when you generate this front, there's a tendency to want to tilt this front back that generate these large vertical velocities, and their correlation with the tracers in the ocean tells us about how strong the vertical tracer fluxes are. And so numerical models have told us over time that these small-scale fronts are important for vertical transport, but we have very anecdotal evidence. These are intermittent features. We have observed individual fronts, and our ability to understand what their integrated impact on the ocean is still pretty immature at this point. So the project we have going forward will leverage two different resources that are relatively new. The first is we are making use of NASA's new Surface Water Ocean Topography Satellite Mission, or SWOT. So satellite altimetry measures variations in the sea surface height. This gives us information about upper ocean currents and energetics. And it's actually a tool that we have had for about 3 decades now. And if you look on the right-hand side, you can see an image of what satellite altimetry has looked like over the past 3 decades. So we're off the eastern coast of the US there. And those colors are showing anomalies in sea surface height. And you can see it's very patchy. That's a picture of sea surface height anomalies. It's roughly integrated over a period of about a month and has a horizontal resolution of about 50 to 100 kilometers, so at the ocean's mesoscale. The SWOT altimeter that was just launched in December, so it's been up for less than a year, and it's already returning some incredibly remarkable images, is the first time that we're getting SSH in a 2-dimensional sense. And so this is a picture of just a single snapshot now, not a time average, in that same region off the east coast of the US. And you can see just how much higher resolution we actually have from the SWOT altimeter, and we can begin to drill down at these sub-50 kilometer scales, these sub-mesoscales. So we'll be using information from the SWOT altimeter in the Southern Ocean, and the second tool we'll be using is an autonomous vehicle known as an ocean glider. This is an autonomous platform that my group has been working with for the past 10 years or so. These are instruments that work very similar to floats in the water column, so they have the ability to modify their buoyancy by inflating or deflating a bladder, which allows them to go up and down in the water column. They are different from purely Lagrangian floats in that they have wings and we have some degree of control over them. So they sort of move through the water in this V-shaped pattern, and they measure various properties, temperature, salinity, dissolved gases, etc. When they come up to the surface, they send their data back in their position in real time. And the traditional way that we would pilot these gliders is to look at the data, plot up some plots, talk to each other, make some decisions about where we want to go, and then update the piloting patterns or the trajectory of the glider. The latency for that is about a day to a couple days, which is actually the time scale over which these small sub-mesoscale features are actually evolving. And so it's not really advantageous to pilot in that manner. So the CAST project we have moving forward is actually to try and develop some autonomous planning that will do the piloting of the glider for us. And we're actually going to be testing this technique actually just in a couple weeks. So with some colleagues in Australia, we are going to a region of the Southern Ocean that's a very energetic region. So on the left-hand side here, this is the Antarctic Circumpolar Current south of Tasmania up there. The color is showing the intensity of the eddy heat flux across the Southern Ocean in this region. And you can see in the cyan colors there are those, the overpass of the SWAT altimeter swath. And so we'll be working in that region. We'll be deploying the gliders from the Australian research vessel, the RV Investigator. As I said, that cruise leaves in just a couple weeks' time. And so what we'll actually be doing is we'll be using the real-time data coming back from SWAT and actually generating surface velocity fields. And in that velocity field, we would deploy a number of Lagrangian particles and eject those particles in real time. Where you have these very strong fronts, those particles separate exponentially. And the magnitude of that exponential separation is what is known as a finite-size Lyapunov exponent. And so on the bottom right-hand side there, you can see a picture of a snapshot of those finite-size Lyapunov exponents in the Southern Ocean. And what we'll be doing is taking that information, along with the in-situ glider data, producing a plan for the glider's trajectory, and then uploading that directly to the glider's base station, and allowing us to persistently sample these fronts without having to pilot this on a day-to-day basis. The deployment duration will be somewhere between 2 to 3 months, which will allow us to sample, we think, over this time period on the order of many tens of these small frontal features and begin to get an integrated information about how important they are for vertical transport. So I'll just conclude to say I recently contributed to a recent National Academy study looking at future directions for Southern Ocean and Antarctic nearshore and coastal research. And one of the key messages that came out of this study was that our future observing systems in the Southern Ocean, and really for most regions of the ocean, are really need to involve a heterogeneous array of autonomous platforms. Some vehicles that are fast, some that can be out for longer periods of time. They may carry different sensors. But they need to be coupled with remote sensing, and then this idea of assimilating the data they're collecting in near real time and updating the sampling patterns for those autonomous vehicles. And so this is work we've been doing in collaboration with JPL over a number of years now, and the work we're doing in the Southern Ocean, I think, is a real step forward in our being able to resolve these smaller scale properties in the ocean. So I think I will stop there, and I am heading off in a minute to teach a class, but if people have questions, I'll be back later in the afternoon. I'd be very welcome. I'm happy to chat with people then. Thanks.
So next up, Matt Anderson is going to be talking about drones and volcanoes.
Hi, so my name is Matt Anderson. I work with the Chung Group, and this is a collaboration that we originally did between JPL, Professor Chung, and Professor Stolper. And the idea is we want to try and do some UAV-Borne volcanic gas capture. So why is this important? Volcanoes are one of the great forces in the world. We've all seen them on TV, and we've seen the destructive power that they have. And we're taught at school that oftentimes these things are completely unpredictable. A volcano explodes because it happens. And it turns out that if you have the right information, you can actually predict that this is going to explode. The challenge there is that the information that we require typically is on the volcano, and trying to send people to collect this information is very dangerous. As soon as the volcano starts to rumble, people say, okay, we can't go to the volcano, we lose the data that we need, and then it could be days, it could be months before that volcano starts to explode. So the research that we're looking at is going for fumaroles. Fumaroles are tiny little holes that have gas that come up, and they start from the magmatic layer below up to the surface. Previous work has a look at what goes on in the plume, but the issue is that as soon as the gas leaves the volcano, it starts to mix with the atmosphere, and then we lose all that really interesting information. So if what we can do is grab the gas from the fumarole straight out of the magmatic layer, we can have a look at the ratios of the CO2 to SO2, for example, and we can start to see from where it's going from a quiescent period, which is not really much is happening, to the big explosive eruption. And this, gives you a couple of days to a couple of weeks beforehand. Dull, dirty, dangerous, that's what UAVs are great for. And this is no exception. So it's dirty because there's a lot of dirt around there. Dangerous, you're on a volcano, and potentially dull because you have to go out and do this day after day to establish baseline measurements. So we developed a volcano drone. It's about 12-inch propellers, 4.5 kilograms, and it has an onboard sampling system. So the idea is that you fly it over to the volcano, you find where the fumarole is, you lower the probe into the fumarole, suck some gas up, and then you can take that back to the lab. They do have multi-gas sensors. Multi-gas sensors are not particularly accurate and not as accurate enough as you need to really find a lot of this information. So you want to bring this back to the lab so you can analyze it in a proper system. We tested this originally in cast, so that's trying to land it into some CO2, which is coming out of some dry ice in front of the fan array. And then we actually deployed this out and took it to, this is basalt fumarole and shady rest fumarole up near Mammoth Mountain. So one of the great parts about my job is they actually pay me to go to these really nice places because that's where the volcanoes are. And Mammoth Lakes, if we've ever been to Mammoth, you see that the kind of steam that comes up off of the freeway. So that's part of the Long Valley caldera. It's very volcanically active. They get a lot of power from the thermal generation. And if you go slightly off the beaten track, you will find these capped pipes. And those actually are putting out steam and some other stuff at about 100 degrees Celsius. And that's a fumarole, so that's the basalt fumarole. So I flew the drone over. This is all manually piloted at the moment, but land the probe in, collect the gas up, and then we can go back and analyze it. And then the other thing I did is, I'm in an autonomy group, so this is going to be 10, 20 kilometers away. We need to be able to find these things autonomously. So I have an IR camera on board and an RGB camera that can actually map what's going on. So we can see that the hot parts where the ground is really warm show up really, really clearly in the thermal, and then as we go down, the actual point, it's only about this big, shows up really well in the thermal, and then we can use that to target. Extending this work out, we can do mapping, so I do a lot of work over on North Field. I put out my fake fumaroles, I map them, and entirely autonomously, I can go through and find where these cold areas are, and then go and map them at different levels. We also move to different sampling systems to really improve the quality of the samples that we're getting, and we've made a much larger drone system. So this work is still ongoing, and eventually we're going to go and take it out to New Zealand, where they're really interested in this work, to capture some volcanic lake water and volcanic gas, because it's something that they can't do at the moment. And so this is a real-world application of some of the work that we do here in CAST. So I've listed some contacts there. Feel free to come and see me later. I've got a poster out the back, and we managed to get 1 publication and 2 presentations so far out of this work. Thank you.
All right, next up is me. You get to hear from me again. I'm going to be talking just shortly about a large project that involved JPL, Caltech, MIT, and universities in Korea and even Sweden. So some of you may have seen that actually DARPA over the last 22 years has hosted a number of what they call the Grand Robotic Challenges. So I just want to briefly summarize the most recent challenge, which ended about 2 years ago. All credit for the leadership of this challenge. We had up to 70 people in the team at any given time. Goes to Aliaga. I'm just sort of presenting today. I was a kind of lieutenant in the project. We had 3 grad students, a staff engineer, and about 6 undergrads from Caltech participate in this. So the idea was to go explore underground spaces and map them and actually find objects that you knew about but you had never seen before, and actually to accurately locate these objects. So one of the crazy trials we had was to actually go up to Washington State. This is an abandoned nuclear reactor, and they gave us the task of actually, in 1 hour, inspecting all of the nuclear reactor core. There were 3 floors, although we didn't know that ahead of time. There was all kinds of debris inside here left over from movie shoots that used this thing. Plus DARPA put 40 different objects, including things like gas leaks and human survivor dummies and cell phones that we actually had to go find. Some of them they put way up high, and that was very difficult to kind of reach. So in this sort of limited time, let me just show you a video. So here's the SATSOP, actually nuclear reactor plant in Washington. And so the way these challenges would work is we wouldn't know the space that we're going into. All you would know is at the beginning we had these April tags, which would allow you to find ground zero. So all your measurements had to be done relative to that ground zero. In this deployment, there's actually 5 robots. We're just going to be following one of the robots during this deployment. It's a robot from Boston Dynamics. These things are amazing vehicles, but they're dumb as a brick. And so what happens is all of the stuff above the yellow is custom that our JPL-led team sort of put together. And so in this case, this robot was tasked with actually going down the stairs, because it knows that stairs might lead to other unexplored spaces. The videos that you see were given to us by DARPA later. This is all that the human operator has. So we only allowed one operator to talk to all the robots. Now, there's actually no communication, no power, no light. So you have to bring your own light. That's why you see the bright light. And now what the robot is doing, it's dropping a communication node so that actually now it can set up a wireless network on all of the floors so that the robots can kind of communicate with each other. Now it's going off and says, aha, I have new area to explore. So it's exploring this area. And so my team actually helped develop the exploration algorithms we call coverage algorithms. How does it decide where to go? And also we made these robots risk aware. So DARPA told us if you see a puddle of water, it might be up to 6 feet deep. So you don't want to go in it. So we would actually then identify mud and water and actually assess how much risk we were taking to actually traverse it or avoid it. So it knows about doorways and other kinds of things. It also has a sense of time. It knows it only has an hour to actually do this competition. So here's a node left by another robot. The other robot actually is a wheeled robot, so it can't go up and down stairs, but it told this robot, look, I found a stair. Why don't you go explore this area? And so here, again, as you see the robot's view going down. And then all of the robots, this is just the graph of one robot. They're making a complicated graph that you'll see in a moment. This is the sparse version of it, where it's saying, look, I've stopped and I have sort of made measurements at each of these orange dots, and this is where I've explored so far. And these orange or yellow cubes here, these are the frontiers where I've not explored yet. If I can't get to them, another robot may have to come back and do them. So here you see the map of other robots being put together, and then now to create a huge map, what the robot does is it goes into, say, a room like this. It's using its LiDAR to gather all the detailed information down to a centimeter accuracy. And then putting this together, actually now to create, this is what that one robot did, and now the other robots will be collaborating and sending their information to the main sort of station, so you get a composite view, not of just that floor, but actually of all the floors that are actually explored by the robots. We were lucky, we found 3 floors, and there were only 3 floors. We just didn't know ahead of time how many floors there would be. Plus, I said the way we got points was detecting these things and finding their location within 5-meter accuracy. So I think all of you are smart enough to know that you could kind of connect the dots between this and things like inspection. And so ever since the DARPA Challenge, we're just wrapping up a project with one of our partners, BP, which is actually looking at how can we use robots to explore really complicated big 3D structures like actually offshore oil rigs and also things like wind farms, solar, et cetera. And going beyond the DARPA Challenge, we've developed algorithms which can solve these problems very efficiently. All right, next up is John Magyar.
Good morning, I'm John Magyar. I'm a staff research scientist in GPS, working with Victoria Orphans Group. And I'm going to talk about a pilot project just funded by CAST to look at seagrass distribution and health. But first, a little bit about seagrass and why we would care to look at it. This is a globally important ecosystem. You can see a map on the left there, a distribution globally of all different types of seagrass, and then more specifically on the right, Zostera marina, the temperate seagrasses. These are vascular plants. They're real plants. They're not seaweeds. They're not algae. Basically, plants that have gone back to the sea from land, live totally submerged in water, and are a really important habitat for lots of different animals in the coastal marine environment. They're a nursery for mollusks and fish and crustaceans. And beyond all of that, they also have a really important role in carbon sequestration. And so you can see that per unit area, this coastal blue carbon environments, which includes salt marshes, mangroves, and seagrass, has a much greater carbon burial rate per area than terrestrial forests do. Terrestrial forests have 45 times greater area on the Earth than these coastal marine environments. But per unit area, seagrasses are incredibly important. And a lot of that has to do with, in fact, the physical sequestration of recalcitrant organic molecules and lignins and so forth in the root systems of these plants in marshes. Victoria's lab has ongoing field and lab studies to look at these processes and to look at the health of seagrass, and in particular looking at the rhizosphere, so the microbial environments that are helping the seagrass to grow and to thrive. And if you want more information about all of that, you can check out our website listed down at the bottom there. But as a complement to these geochemical and microbial studies, we wanted to get a better sense of the broader health of these kinds of ecosystems. So the work that we're doing is based at Caltech's Marine Lab down in Corona del Mar. Kirchhoff Marine Lab was founded in 1930. It was part of what brought Thomas Hunt Morgan to Caltech to found the biology division. And since then, it's been involved in a lot of different studies, and right now one of the main things that is happening down there is this seagrass project. So you can see on the right the view from the balcony at the lab. The darker area just off the end of the pier is a seagrass bed, and so our studies are right here in the Newport entrance channel. That's the wedge surf break over the other side of the jetty. And so from Kirchhoff, we have a really good opportunity to study these kinds of environments very conveniently. And on the pier, you can see our robot boat, a Teledyne Q-boat, that we are working to develop for these autonomous studies I'm going to tell you about in a little bit. So the city of Newport Beach and the Orange County Coastkeeper have been doing for more than a decade now studies of seagrass monitoring and, in fact, restoration in Newport Bay, and particularly restoration in Upper Newport Bay. You can see on the left an image of seagrass distribution in 2018, on the right 2020. And so the city has been monitoring eelgrass and trying to expand and protect eelgrass in Newport Bay, which is a major small boat area in lower Newport Bay. And then the back bay is one of the last remaining untouched estuaries in Southern California. And the Marine Lab is right there. One of the challenges in these monitoring and restoration projects, though, is that is one of scale. So these are currently done using sonar. They're currently and using divers. This is very time and labor intensive. Basically, it can only be done once a year, and it only measures the extent and not the health of the seagrass. And so what we wanted to be able to do using spectroscopy is to be able to do this more often and better. And so that brings us to our CAST-funded pilot project using the autonomous vehicle on the left. We've just taken delivery of this Ecotone underwater hyperspectral imaging spectrometer. So it has capabilities in the visible range of the spectrum, 5 nanometer spatial resolution, spectral resolution, that is, as well as an RGB camera so we can see pictures of what we're looking at. And then we're also outfitting the boat with a sonar system. It has GPS and IMU, so we know where we are and what our attitude is, and has shore-facing LiDAR for keeping us from bumping into things when we're in autonomous mode. So the advantage of using this hyperspectral imaging is that we can, besides just looking and seeing what the seagrass looks like, we can get spectral data that can help us to eventually autonomously figure out, and through machine learning, figure out whether we're looking at seagrass, whether we're looking at kelp, whether we're looking at a rock, and so doing those kinds of identifications. And by using this autonomous surface vehicle, that is the drone boat, as opposed to an aerial spectrometer, you can actually see in the figure at the left, we get much better, or this was a group in Norway, but much better identification of the seagrass when you're not going through quite so much of the water column. We also have to provide our own light source, which helps again, to deal with the attenuation of light by the water column. And so these are the very first images from our hyperspectral imager. These are taken from a kayak, and so you can see also on the right that once we can have an autonomous system, there will be great advantages in coverage and a lot less work. But you see on the left here an RGB image of seagrass, some spectral images, and then in the sonar, you can see the difference between a rocky area and the vegetated area. And so we can merge those sonar images with the GPS tracking and the spectral images. And so that is all to come very soon. And the idea with this is that we can look not only at the Newport Bay area, but expand this with collaborators at JPL and take advantage of both the airplane-based AVARIS-NG surveys and then going on to the EMIT instrument on the space station and look at Newport Bay and then at the whole California coast and beyond, doing ground truthing with the ASV in Newport and elsewhere, and then using that information to cover a much broader area with these aerial technologies. And then finally, I just want to welcome collaborations from other people within CAST down at the Marine Lab for projects related to this or other kinds of things where having access to the ocean would be convenient. And so we've been working with collaborators at MBARI, the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, who have these mapping AUVs. We've used these very successfully at sea, launched from a ship, do mapping overnight, and then go down with an ROV and investigate methane seeps and so forth, as shown in the center there. And one of the things that we've been talking about doing is hosting some of these kinds of mapping AUVs at the Marine Lab. They could go out autonomously from the Newport entrance channel and go investigate some of these sites, such as ones that we've been studying in the channel between here and Catalina, such as Redondo Knoll and Lazuan Knoll, which have these active methane seeps. And so if there are other things that people on campus or at JPL would like to do, please come talk to me or to Victoria. Thank you.
Okay, last person between you and a break is Alejandro Zavala, who will be talking about flying into the unknown.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Alejandro. I'm a fourth-year graduate student in a Moyes lab. And I just want to really quickly introduce to you a really exciting new project we have, which we call Flying into the Unknown. And the goal of the project is to enable autonomous flight in urban environments. So there we go. So first of all, as a little bit of motivation, consider a drone that's trying to fly through Caltech Hall. So that would be, the iconic Caltech Tower, which is what we call a building in an urban canyon, sort of. So basically, it's just a single building, and there's, structures around the building that are going to cause an interesting effect when they interact with the wind, right? And like Peter mentioned in the earlier session, there's a lot that you cannot see that you don't really take into account when you try to fly, in an environment where the wind is going to interact with objects, so basically the wind, right? So for example, in this little motivating figure, you have a drone that's trying to deliver something on the side of a building, and there's all of these, like I said, invisible wind effects that could potentially crash the drone, right? So there's shear layers on the sides, there's updrafts and then downdrafts on the top of the building, and then there's, necklace vortices on the sides. And what I'm trying to convey to you is that flight in cities, it's hard. Flight alone is already hard, but flight in cities is even harder. It's a high-dimensional, extremely dynamic problem with extremely disparate environments. And not only that, but the proximity to people and property increases the standard for your ability to, for reliability and your ability to guarantee that reliability, right? And this means that, of course, we need algorithms that generalize to unseen environments, right? Because, like I said, you cannot sort of train on a single case, like, for example, this building, and then expect that your algorithm is just going to work when, for example, there's two buildings and there's a completely different scenario, there's completely different weather, for example, right? So we need algorithms that can generalize without training on specific examples, and they can give reliable performance bounds for informed estimates of the flow field, and then their identification of where you can fly and where you can't and how, and then can produce comprehensive path planning around around these flow fields to sort of fulfill their missions, right? And this is just sort of an illustration of actually CFD in Toronto, just to sort of give you an idea of one of the outputs in the sort of stack of the algorithm that we're trying to put together, and that would be an estimate of the flow field in a city, except instead of doing really comprehensive CFD that's going to take hours or days to produce, we want to update these in real time. And so I'm going to give you sort of a motivating baseline experiment. This is the setup that we're putting together in CAST. So this is what we would, sort of our little mock-up of a building, right? And here is a drone that we instructed to fly using our motion capture camera system to navigate behind the building, between the building and the fan array. And we told it to fly in this sort of zigzag pattern, moving backwards in the drone arena. And as a baseline, right now, there's no wind, right? So the drone is doing fine, right? You see it just tracks the trajectory. It looks like this. So this is, this is the fan array. This is the footprint of the base of the building. The gray line here is the trajectory we told the drone to follow, and the red line is the trajectory the drone actually followed, right? Now, we add a little bit of wind, 7 meters per second wind, on the fan array, blowing into the building and then running into the building and producing a wake, behind the building when the wind is going to sort of wrap around the building and then run into itself and create this chaotic pattern. And, how well do you think the drone did if it didn't know the wind was there? Well, it did this well. I'm very glad it's unmanned. And there's no, not someone trying to, not throw up flying in that. This is 7 meters per second wind. It's not that fast. You can find this in like an average day flying, up in New York, right? It didn't do very well. Okay, we're at 1 minute. Okay, cool. So just very quickly, don't be confused by the title. This is actually not just without wind. We're showing both. So the ghost there is the example you saw before, and then on top of it is the actual, drone flying with the 7 meters per second wind. It's not doing so hot, right? So this is to sort of motivate to show you what happens when you don't know the wind. This is not a hard problem to solve if you actually know the flow field. You have an estimate of it. And so what's the methodology that we're proposing for this project? Well, we sort of want to split the problem into two stages. The first stage is going to be the flow estimation, right? So take in all of the sources of information that can be used to estimate the flow field. Now, this is really hard if you're trying to do, say, for example, only CFD, or you're trying to train a neural network from the ground up. It's not that hard if you're really comprehensive with the sources of information that you use, right? And this is what we're trying to do, right? So we're trying to estimate the flyer's attitude, geometry, and flow field using both, I'm trying to hurry up here because we're out of time, and I'm between you and the break. But the one thing I'm going to highlight here is the idea of having two levels of integration at this stage. So basically both high-level qualitative sources of information using generative models and language models. So for example, there may exist documentation on the flow field around a building when the building was built, right? This could actually be leveraged using high-level AI. And then you can add the reliability and the performance guarantees of a quantitative, well-proven method like a Gaussian process, which is basically equivalent to an extended Kalman filter. And then we can do path planning on this flow estimate, right? And so just one more thing I want to show you. This is sort of a diagram of what that architecture of the system would look like. We're out of time, though, so talk to me at the break. Thank you so much.